So we're going to be able to hold this completely when we go into closed session on WebEx, right? We're broadcast live.
Yeah, so Dylan set up it differently.
Yeah, I saw that. I just want to make sure that whomever is going to be...
So he'll be here for that. We will turn everything off, and then it'll just be for you guys. And if you want it recorded, it'll be recorded on Monday. If you
No, I don't want to
record it. You don't want to record it, it'll just be...
Because I'll just take the notes for the notes purposes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, great. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, so I think let me go ahead and call this meeting to order. And I will encourage people to speak directly into the microphone, although I'm getting some feedback on the microphone, so maybe I'm speaking too directly into the microphone. But at any rate, if you will do that, that will help the transcribers for today. I'm Stan Myberg. I'm the chair of the EMC, and welcome to everyone who's here. As a preliminary matter, we'll do the usual usual reminder from the North Carolina General Statute. NC General Statute 138-15E mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. And the chair shall also inquire as to whether any known conflicts of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. Is there anybody who has a conflict of interest? And now I'm going to go ahead and call the roll because we have a number of members who are on remotely today, and that will affect the conduct of the meeting. Okay, hearing no conflicts of interest. Item number 2 there was on approval of minutes, and we're not going to do that because the minutes are still not ready, and I apologize to the members of the commission for this, but hopefully we'll get that straightened out again in September. So let me do a roll call again, just even though it's not a remote meeting. I want to make sure I know who's on, especially who's on the video today. And so here I see in the room Commissioner Arata, Commissioner Carter, Commissioner Deerhagen, Commissioner Monis, and Commissioner Solomon, as well as myself. And on the WebEx, I see Commissioner Davis. Are you here?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner Harris, I see you on the video as well. Are you? Or I see your name on there. Are you here?
I'm here.
Very good. And Commissioner Bailey, I see you. You see your name on the screen as well. Are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I was afraid you were going to skip me.
Well, I was going to ask if you and the other commissioners who I said, oh, thank you for turning on your video. Thank you, Commissioner Davis. You are a role model for exactly what I hope everybody else will do. So, because we can see you, and that's very helpful. Thank you, Commissioner Harris. And Commissioner Bailey, we invite you to turn on your camera as well. I want to ask if any of the other names are actually commissioners, because I'm expecting Commissioner Keene and Commissioner McAdams and Commissioner Lazorick to sign in at some point as well. Are any of these names actually any of those people? Okay, hearing none. Raptul, if you'll keep an eye on the sign-ins, though, and if Commissioner Keene, Commissioner McAdams, and Commissioner Lazorick sign in, that would be really helpful. Let us know and let's get them up on the screen. I know that in the case of Commissioner McAdams and Commissioner Lazorick, they both had conflicting activities that were right on top of this meeting. So, and I think Commissioner Keene also wanted to sign in remotely. So, if you'll keep an eye out for those commissioners, that would be really helpful. So, thank you. Okay. Well, the first item we have is a petition for rulemaking pursuant to North Carolina General Statutes 150B 20 and 15A NCAC 02I.0500 to adopt rules to limit CO2 pollution from the electric power sector. And this is a petition to rulemaking coming to the Commission. As I think most people know, we had a committee hearing on this petition pursuant to the rules of the Commission on June the 15th. And I wanted to turn to Air Quality Committee Chair Arata to report on the results of the committee meeting. So, Chair Arata, I'll turn that over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Iberg. So at the Air Quality Committee meeting on June 15th, the committee decided by a 4-to-1 vote to recommend that the petition come forward to the full Commission today. I'll just try to cover a few of the larger items that we talked about since it was a detailed discussion. The first item was auction proceeds, about how those would be spent and held, and to clarify that under this particular petition, proceeds would be held by the regulated utilities or would go back to the utilities, and how the money would ultimately be spent would be a matter of the Utilities Commission's decision, which is an additional rulemaking past our authority. We also spoke a bit about how other RGGI states have used those proceeds, and some of the examples that were given were through direct bill assistance, which would help with any increased rates for the ratepayers, climate programs, and efficiency measures. We briefly spoke about the role that other parts of the government would have, regardless of whatever this commission does. If the commission ultimately chose to adopt the proposed rule, then the governor still has a role to play. But after that rule went into effect, the governor still would be able to negotiate with RGGI as an organization. And also, like I mentioned, the Utilities Commission would need to take action to decide how it is those auction proceeds would be used. And the final point that we talked about was to confirm that the fiscal note absolutely would be ready before anything went out to public notice and comment. I think those were the main points.
And what action did the committee take on the petition, on the petition?
Voted to recommend that the petition come forward to the commission today.
Okay, so this is the recommended to grant the petition.
Yes.
Thank you. What I thought I would do today, given that we have a number of and I see Commissioner McAdams has joined us. Good morning. What I thought I would do is, given the number of commissioners we have on video, is I would borrow a page from Commissioner Arata's playbook and have questions from commissioners just going around the circle again, as we've sort of done before, in alphabetical order. And I know that there are some members who have expressed interest in having questions for the department, and representatives of the department are here and are prepared to answer whatever questions commissioners may have. So in alphabetical order, I don't see Commissioner Anderson here today. And Commissioner Anderson, are you on the phone or video by any chance? Okay. Commissioner Arata, did you have any additional questions?
No further questions.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Bailey, do you have additional questions?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Carter.
Mr. Chairman, I'm taking a look at something I wanted to ask some questions, but I'd like to pass for now until I'm later in the discussion.
Okay, fine. I'll come back to you. Commissioner Davis.
No, none at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Deerhake.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Harris.
I don't have any questions at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Keene, are you on the phone or on the video remotely by any chance? Okay, hearing none. Commissioner McAdams.
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Modest.
Not at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon.
I do have one on the process, and we'll maybe go to council, Mr. Chairman, but I'll ask you. So this is a petition to start the rulemaking process, is what we'll vote on today, which is a little different than what Committee Chair Arata just said, because technically this, I believe, as a process, the department would start the rulemaking process. That would have to come back to the Air Quality Committee and then to the full EMC when the fiscal notice is completed. So we're not voting to take this to public today. We're voting to start the process, which means it has to be brought back to the Air Quality Committee and the full EMC with the fiscal note for us to go for public advertisement.
Thank you for asking a question. Even I can answer, although the council will know that correctly if I get anything wrong. But yes, that's correct. That what our action is today, and it's really just a matter of language, that to grant the petition simply it means to start the rulemaking process. That if we grant the petition today, then the department is going to have to develop the full rulemaking package, which will follow the process that you described, and will have to include a fiscal note, and there'll be a lot of discussion. So this is really very much the beginning of something rather than a conclusory statement. Anything else to add to that? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Carter, I hate to...
Well, yeah, I was hoping for a little more time, Mr. Chairman, but let me just go ahead and jump into it. One of the main points I want to...
yeah, if you would...
I'm sorry, yeah. One of the main things I want to get into is, probably that's a question that simply, I think it's something the Commission needs to understand a little better about this petition. And what I was doing, I was just double checking something I noticed since the last session. Commissioner or Chair Arata correctly pointed out that the involvement of the Utility Commission with respect to anything that was involved directly with utility rates, that is for Duke Energy. But one of the major problems I see with this petition is we need to, I don't know if anybody else is focused as much as I have perhaps on this is Exhibit C. It's the list of affected entities. And I'm just going through to double check my count here, or what I looked at here. If you go through and highlight those that are not Duke Energy, you'll find that more than half of the entities that will be affected by this rule are not Duke Energy. We've got the REAs, the Electric Membership Corporation involved. We've got the power. Where's the power? I lost it. The Municipal Power Agency. We've got the Fayetteville Public Works Commission, and then we've got a bunch of also just private or companies that simply happen to have a cogen of some sort on site that's more than 25 megawatts, and they're also going to be affected by this. Well, that means that whatever happens with, if this thing goes forward the way it's structured right now, the Utilities Commission would have nothing to do with any of the funds or any of the requirements imposed on any of those entities, period. So I don't know what the money's going to, where it's going to end up in their pocket, whether they're just going to have to suck it up and be a big loss, particularly for the smaller entities like the Power Agency and the REAs, but also these private entities, the companies like Archer Daniels Midland's on here, International International Paper, Domtar, Smithfield Packing, Blue Ridge Paper Products, and so on. Bottom line is, this thing is not structured in a way that makes any sense to me at this point. Certainly not with the belief that somehow or other the Utilities Commission is going to rescue us from, if we commit the folly of imposing something that looks like there's going to be several $100 million in costs on these entities and the electric utilities and other customers in North Carolina. So this is one of the major reasons why I think this is a solution looking for a problem to solve, and this is not it. And I will say further, I've been a little surprised that we haven't seen something coming forward from the department in the 4 years plus that we've been under the Cooper administration. I thought we'd have something within the first couple of years, and then this thing comes forward. And frankly, I just don't see it. I know there's a bunch of states that have signed on to it in the Northeast. There's two issues there. Number one, there's nothing in the Northeast that I think we ought to follow, particularly some of the recent activities up there. And I won't get into the mess they created on COVID up there, but just in general. Number two, I don't see any real CO2 reductions that are going on up there. The issue that Commissioner Vanderbilt brought up on the 15th is the major one, which is leakage. And all it's going to do, all this ultimately ends up doing, is simply shifting generation to other states outside the RGGI region. There's no other choice. And that comes to, I guess, a fundamental point that I guess I mentioned to you after the session, but I think everybody else in this room needs to understand. And that is this. There's been a lot of talk, and there's a lot of notion about cap and trade and what a wonderful system cap and trade is. And the example that's always used is Title IV of the 1990 amendments. Well, the 1990 amendment to Title IV is a terrific cap and trade system. There's no two ways about it. But there's a fundamental flaw here, and it's the major difference between this and Title IV, and that is this. The reason we were so successful with Title IV is there was control equipment available for sulfur dioxide, which was the pollution we were trying to control. And in the preliminary discussions and analysis that EPA did before we put Title IV into the bill, the estimate they came up with was that an allowance, once the system was in place, an allowance would probably cost on the order of $2,000 a ton. That is, each allowance represents a ton of would represent a ton of SO2, and it would cost an entity that needed about $2,000 a ton. Well, the result after the program was fully implemented was this: a number of companies, rather than going out and taking it, the control equipment was one option. The other option was, of course, to go to lower sulfur coal to reduce their sulfur dioxide. But a bunch of companies said, hey, you know what, we can make money off of this. So we'll go out and we'll put on scrubbers and reduce our emissions well beyond what we need to just to meet our obligation under Title IV. That created a surplus of allowances. And within a few years after the full implementation of Title IV, the cost, instead of $2,000 a ton, you go to the Chicago Board of Trade and buy an allowance for something under $200, an order of magnitude lower. Now, the point I want to make is we don't have that here. That doesn't exist because there is no existing significant control system. There's a few experimental types of things, I guess, for carbon dioxide. So the only choice is if you can't put a control device on and you're going to be limited by the number of allowances or credits you obtain under this RGGI system, you're going to have to shut it down. You can't run it. And you've got an obligation as a utility to provide electricity in your state. You've got no real choice other than go out of state and purchase electricity. And electricity is going to come from a non-regulated state. It's not going to be regulated for CO2. And if anything, you're certainly not going to reduce CO2 emissions. If anything, this probably, if you're buying from the Midwest and some of the other states that are still fairly significantly using coal, you may even increase CO2. So what we've got here is something that promises something which is illusory. It's just not going to happen in any way, shape, or form. And I guess the final point I would make is this: I don't see any authority, and I'm just going to be real blunt about this, for us to impose a several $100 million cost through these regulations. Now, I know there's been this discussion and argument about, well, we've got this credit system that's in the statute. Well, that credit system, the water system, is voluntary. No one has to engage in it. Nobody's required to do it. They can choose to do it if they choose to go forward under that system. That's not going to be the case if we go forward with this rule. It's going to be mandatory on everybody on this list. And that's, you can see how yellow it is. Most, as I said, most of the entities on here are not Duke Energy. So that's what we're stuck with if we go forward with this thing now. This doesn't make sense now. If you want to go revisit it, recraft it, rethink it, that's one thing. But right now, this just, it doesn't make sense at all to go forward with this thing, the way it is currently structured. And as I said, I don't think we have authority for it. I think what happened if we ended up with a rule that looked anything like this, it runs smack into the Rules Review Commission. They're going to send it right back and say, where the heck do you guys think you have any kind of authority for this? And I'll also make one further point. I haven't seen anything recently about this, but the legislature's working on an energy bill, which at least got all the folks at the table and looks at doing earlier retirements, as I understand it, of I guess the remaining coal units, converting to gas, natural gas, and some other things. But anyway, it's a balanced system to come up with something which actually would reduce CO2 in the state. This won't do it. And of course, the legislature, where this kind of decision ought to be made anyway, not in this commission, which simply, in my view, just doesn't have the authority. And those are some of the reasons why I voted against this coming out when we voted on the committee. I will vote against it again today. And I don't really have any questions further than that. If you want to hear from the department, I'd be happy to hear from the department, see what their thoughts are on this. And I know they've done a lot of work. Let me give some credit here. Now, I'm not suggesting that they are not haven't been diligently working on some things. And the study that you came forward with most recently, I forgot the name of it.
The A1 study?
Yeah. I think that there was awful lot of work that went in there. By the way, one thing that has been mentioned to me was that apparently someone who's directly involved with it, not one of the authors of Reggie, conceded during the process that yes, there would be leakage. That's exactly what would happen the way this system is structured, unless you were somehow or another going to impose it on all 50 states. So I think there's probably some good work there. I think there's some good options we ought to look at as far as reducing CO2. But we need to be looking at cost-effective, reasonable options to go forward with CO2 reduction. And this thing is not it. It's just not even close to it, particularly with the costs and the other impositions it's imposed on the state and on our consumers in the state. Oh, and one other thing, fiscal note. Yeah, we need absolutely need a fiscal note. The other thing, if we're really going to go forward with this, and it looks like it's going to hit utility rates and so on, I think we clearly need something that the department is focused on right now. We need an environmental justice analysis too to accompany that. There's no way we should even consider doing anything with this without a serious EJ review and analysis to accompany it. And with that, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Let me turn to the department, to Director Abrazetskas or to Sushma. I'm sorry, I don't remember exactly your title. Assistant Secretary.
Assistant Secretary.
Mazemore, thank you. Assistant Secretary Major, any particular comments you'd like to make?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Get that feedback sound to stop there. Okay. So thank you for the comments, Commissioner Carter. So I think to start, there's a couple things to unpack there. I think to start, we believe the petition is a directionally correct policy that can make progress towards some of the EO80 goals. It's an option amongst many options. You heard several options at the March AQC meeting during the presentation of the A1 report. But we do believe the petition is approvable and a directionally correct policy amongst many policy options. If the Commission grants the petition, as noted earlier by the Chairman, it begins the rulemaking process. And so that would commence while not precluding consideration of other options. Commissioner Carter, you mentioned the inclusion of some industrial sources and facilities that are not under the purview of the Utilities Commission. I will say that in our review of the petition that's before you, we've been in contact with Reggie Inc. to try to better understand the program We've been in contact with participating Regi states and also identified the inclusion of these facilities that are not under the purview of the Utilities Commission. And that's something that we would have to sort through during the rulemaking process and the development of the fiscal note should the petition be granted. So I think that it maybe helps speak to that particular item.
Commissioner Solomon.
I'm going to shift gears for a second and come back to this one, but I don't want to leave out this point of order. I was asked by a couple people, probably because of a previous role I had on this commission, the 120-day requirement. And the way I had initially explained that was that I don't know if it's a statute or a rule, but some of our enabling documentation says that it starts at a different time than most other commissions start their 120 days. And I'd just like your comment or Councilman Reynolds' comments on the 120 days and the standing for not being within the 120 days.
Yeah, I'm going to defer that one to Councilor Reynolds. I will note, though, want to make sure to note for the record that Dr. Lazoric has joined us on the meeting. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Solomon, answer your question. 150B-20 does set a 120-day time frame. Our rules previously, actually the set of rules that apply to this petition based on the timing of it, did provide that there was that the 120 days would start when the petition was declared complete, but we typically try to stay within that 120-day deadline. The thing that's been consistent in all of our rules, and I think is consistent within the statute, is that the right to enforce that 120-day deadline is the petitioner's. And so we have always included in our rules that the petitioner can agree to extend that time to accommodate additional research or additional needs. And in this instance, we by agreement did extend that 120-day deadline and set the hearings for June and July as we've done.
And thank you. I knew we'd done that in the past. I just wanted to get the official clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, and just one other thing. I just realized that I should have passingly mentioned, or should have included in my description of discussion of Title IV. And that is that one of the things that I saw when we were doing Title IV was what turned out to be a really excellent working relationship between the then administration, which was the H.W. Bush administration, and the Environmental Defense Fund. And that's really where Title IV was created. In fact, my impression at the time was that EDF was the one who actually came forward, brought it to the Bush administration, and sold it. And that's what got worked through. It was a collaboration between the outside groups and the administration. And I think that really is an excellent model for the kind of thing we're going to be doing here.
And I'll just say as an observation from having shared some of the same life experiences as Commissioner Carter, that there's no question that the whole process of developing the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments was a collaborative process that has a lot to commend itself to the current day. It was a lot of work. Everybody involved at the time it was over was exhausted. And wasn't sure they wanted to do that again. But it was a very collaborative and in-depth process that produced a lot of benefits. And now, 30 years later, I share Commissioner Carter's view about the benefits that accrued to the country from the passage of those amendments, and it's really pretty remarkable. This is, again, somewhat irrelevant, but we had a student I was talking to from Senegal yesterday at Wake Forest, and the student said that one of the things he was so impressed about was when he came over to the United States, all the cars were clean. And he said, "How did that happen?" I said, "Well, it's a long story." But there is much to be proud of in those accomplishments. And in some ways, my own sense is that we face that same kind of challenge in the country now. Are there other specific questions that any other commissioners want to pose to the department? I'll just do one more round, just to be sure. Commissioner Arata?
No further questions.
Okay. Commissioner Bailey?
None for me.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter?
No, nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Deerhead?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Harris?
No thanks.
Commissioner Keene, are you on? Oh, there he is. Hey, Steve.
No questions.
Okay, so note for the record, Commissioner Keene is on the call. Commissioner McAdams?
No questions.
Commissioner Milas?
No questions.
And Commissioner Solomon? Okay. I'll just make a couple of observations, then I'm going to ask for a motion. It's interesting that you see utilities around the country are now making commitments to zero carbon by some date. Some have said 2040, some have said 2050, and to significant reductions in the interim. So Commissioner Carter is correct that you don't have quite the same control technology options for this that you did for SO2. But that doesn't mean you have no options, and there are a lot of places that are pursuing those. And with respect to RGGI, it's interesting. I tried to look up some data in reports, and it said in the report that I looked at, which was from the Acadia Center, reported that as of 2018, that CO2 emissions from RGGI power plants had fallen by 47%, which outpaced the rest of the country substantially. That electricity prices in RGGI states had fallen by 5.6%, while prices had increased in the rest of the country by 8.6%. That the GDP of the RGGI states has grown by 47%, which outpaced growth in the rest of the country by almost a third. That RGGI states had generated $3.2 billion in allowance auction proceedings, with the majority of which have been invested in energy efficiency and renewable energy programs. And that RGGI-driven reductions in co-pollutant emissions resulted in over $5.7 billion in health and productivity benefits. And I say that only to make the note that the one thing about this petition that is kind of different is that it is moving to adopt a system that's already in place in 11 states, including our neighbor to the north. It's not something that North Carolina would be doing uniquely or independently. Now, having said that, Commissioner Carter is absolutely right in that the rulemaking on this petition is going to be a real challenge, greater than any other rulemaking on any petition that's come before the Commission, at least in my tenure. And I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. At the same time, it seems that this is an option that is available to the state to help achieve the goals that the governor set in his Executive Order 80. And it's an option that we have at our disposal and ought to be on the table. And so that's, I guess, my feeling. My own feeling is that I would like to see, just for myself, to have the state make as much progress in carbon reductions that it practically can as fast as possible. And I'm open to just about anything that moves toward that goal. But the thing we have in front of us now is a rare opportunity for this commission to use its ability to help move the process forward. Moving the process forward doesn't mean we're at the end of the process. We are only at the very beginning, and the hard work in many ways lies ahead. So again, Commissioner Carter is correct, and I don't want to diminish that in any way, but to get started, you have to get started. So with that, I would entertain a motion on the petition.
Chairman Meyer, it's Suzanne Mazurek. I just wanted to have a chance to ask a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Suzanne. Go ahead.
Yes. Just since I joined a little late, did the commission already discuss the letter that we received raising some environmental justice concerns about training programs like this? Did you all talk about that in the beginning, or did Commissioner Solomon bring it up?
No, we did not, but I'll be glad to say a little bit about that because I looked at that letter and I am very much in sympathy with the notion that we need to be looking at environmental justice impacts of anything that the commission or the department do. And so from that spirit, I got it. I did think that the point was a little off because for a couple of reasons, one of which is the quote that was used from the CRS report was taken a bit out of context. That the context was, and when you read it, it says that there was a question of whether or not the contributions from RGGI and compared to global GHG emissions was significant. And there's no question that when you look at global GHG emissions, this is a global problem. This is the larger question about taking action on carbon generally by the United States. On the other hand, the question remains that if we don't act, what incentive or obligation or example do we have to encourage others to act? And the quote that was taken went on to say, however, RGGI's activities may stimulate action in other states or at the federal level. Compared to a patchwork of state and regional requirements, industry stakeholders may prefer a single national policy. And for a number of reasons, experiences in RGGI may be instructive for policymakers seeking to craft a national program. And it went on to cite the similar statistics to what I did with respect to the benefits that RGGI had provided in terms of health, and in this case, they also cited a number of 40,000 job years. So this was good for the economies of the RGGI states as well as for the health benefits. So I got that. I think we all take that issue about environmental justice seriously, but I think there are a number of countervailing things. But this will certainly be considered in the rulemaking process. Commissioner Solomon.
Yeah, point of order. You were getting ready to make the motion. Whether it passes or not, I was going to suggest or recommend or even make a motion that we introduce, I think it was Ms. Chavis's letter of yesterday, into the record to benefit the rulemaking process. I don't know. I think the letters, the emails that were kind of some, we all probably got 24 emails from different people. I think they were pretty much blanket emails. But I did find, and they're in the public record, I guess, if you look, but I would like to put into our record Ms. Chavis's letter that I think she put a lot of time into and some thought, whether right or wrong, I think it needs to be in the record.
No, I don't think there'd be any objection to that, or to any of the other letters we got. I got at least one of them that I can think of that I would want to go into the record as well.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, since you mentioned it, I will bring it up, and that was your comment about encouraging folks to do the right thing under the Paris Accord, and somehow or another this is going to help that. I've been doing some research, and I think we'll want to get into this further as we go forward with this, because I'm pretty sure this vote's going to carry, and we're going to go forward with this petition. But I think we need to be realistic about the Paris Accord and what it is, and most importantly, what it is not. I pulled up a couple of charts last night, and just so everyone understands, the very largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, not surprisingly, is China. They emit about twice what the United States does. And under the Paris Accord, they currently have no limit or no requirement to reduce their emissions. They are just adding coal-fired power plants and adding CO2 out the wazoo. And the reason is that under the Paris Accord, they have no obligation to do anything until 2030 except to continue to increase their emissions. That's explicit in the Accord. The reason for that is they're considered a quote-unquote developing country. Now, how China, which has the second largest economy in the world, can be a developing country is beyond me. There's no logic to that I can understand. And just so everybody understands, this is what was negotiated in Paris in 2015 by the Biden-Obama administration and John Kerry, who was Secretary of State at the time, who is now our great climate change advocate running around the world and accomplishing nothing that I can see. He met actually with the Chinese a few months back and was over negotiating with them supposedly. You didn't hear a thing coming out of that. I assume he was there trying to convince them to stop their growth of their CO2 emissions and actually do something to reduce emissions. So let's be real clear-eyed about this. We've been reducing emissions every year from well back in the early 2000s, and it continued under the previous administration. It's continuing under this administration. The Chinese are doing nothing except increasing emissions. So let's be clear that the Paris Accord is not this end-all, be-all. It doesn't matter whether we're in the Paris Accord or not. It has no enforceability on top of everything else. And countries like China and there are others in the developing world, the graph showed that the EU is coming down, U.S. is coming down, and the other quote-unquote developed countries are, but on the rest of the world, it's increasing like crazy. So let's just be understanding that we're not going to accomplish anything with this, and nothing realistic as far as CO2 reductions. And I do want to take a closer, harder look at Paris as we go forward with this thing, since I'm satisfied that's where we're going.
Thank you. Commissioner Arata.
Since our jurisdiction stops at North Carolina, I'm ready to offer a motion.
Fire away.
I move to grant the rulemaking petition.
Second.
Okay. Is that clear enough? All righty. Let's go ahead and do the vote.
Well, we got discussion on the motion.
I'm sorry. Discussion on the motion, Commissioner Solomon.
Yeah, a couple things, and I don't want to be too long-winded, but I do want to make a couple high-level thoughts. I do think this, I know this, and I say I know it because I've heard it directly from a lot of parties, and Commissioner Carter talked about the General Assembly. We are going to be off coal-fired plants by 2050. Duke is committed to that. Most of the emissions are going to be off. I think the parties on both sides are committed to that. We are going to be in a different place by 2050. I think the question is, how fast do we strand the investments that have been made, and what does that mean to rates for our taxpayers? So I don't think we need this to drive us to something. I don't think we'll get there by 2030, and I think at the end of the day, this is probably a good tool, but not a tool that we will need, because I think there are already negotiations for how to get our coal-fired plants from our investor-owned utilities off the system, which are the biggest thing to do. So I'll say that off the bat. I do think I think Southern Environmental Law Center has done an outstanding job of putting together a package and an option here for us and to raise awareness. But I do think at the higher level, me personally, I think that it is better probably turned over at this point to the department to work out between the administration and the General Assembly to come up with a total solution and bring us back a rule that could include RGGI or not. And so I really believe that's where we should go with this. So that's how I'll vote in the negative. But for this particular petition, I'll give it a couple pieces that I think it's deficient in, because I think that's what's on the table. As far as completeness, I'm not satisfied with financial considerations. It's a lot here to do with how is the program going to be funded. There is no money for DEQ to administer this, and that's a clever design. We'll talk about that in a second. But there's no money for DEQ to administer this. As we've mentioned, the role of the Utility Commission and the proceeds is left out. And third, the role of the Utility Commission in the rate making is left out. So again, going back to where I think this is deficient, is it's not thorough enough in laying that out. And I do think that's a clever design, but that's where it's deficient. The other part I think is deficient is the ability of this commission to obligate North Carolina to a multi-state consortium and to impose that tax, as Commissioner Carter says, to everyone. There's no exceptions here. There's nothing else. This is in the form of a tax, and that's not a legal term for Councilman Reynolds to attack. But we are extracting money from everybody in the state at the request of this commission in rulemaking, and we're moving that money across state lines. I do not believe that that's been thought out enough in this process and in this petition. So that's another reason I would vote against it. I think the financial considerations and our ability to go across multi-state consortiums by this EMC are the two questions that make this incomplete to me. The third thing I will say, and I'll add on because I do think it's important, money that would go to DEQ to administer this would have to come from the General Assembly. Proceeds now from this, technically, if they were would have to come through the General Assembly if they went straight to DEQ. Those questions are left out. On just a personal note, I think that the General Assembly has been totally left out of this. And I do think if we're talking about transparency and the role of the people, I do believe that the General Assembly should be included in these discussions and not just be done on rulemaking. But the two real reasons, I think, from a structural standpoint, are the insufficiency of the financial considerations and our ability to work across state lines, which we do not have clarification on yet. And I don't even think at the high level, JD speaking, we need this, because I think our coal-fired plants are going off. We can all disagree on that, we can all debate that, but I just don't think it's needed, so I'll vote against.
Mr. Mollis.
Yeah, I just want to share a few points before we vote. So, as I consider any climate policy, there are three main things that I'm looking for. One is, like you said, Chair Myberg, reducing carbon emissions rapidly. And the cap on emissions included in the petition would accomplish that by decreasing coal generation in North Carolina. In the A1 modeling, RGGI results in about a 65% reduction in emissions by 2030, primarily from retiring coal-fired plants and reduced generation from coal plants remaining online. And we talked, and I asked a question about this in the committee meeting about how market forces are currently pushing our power sector in the right direction to reduce emissions, and why do we need climate policy on top of that? Well, right now, we have the opportunity to reduce emissions significantly at a relatively low cost, but the last tranche of emission reductions that we need is going to be more difficult. And so we need to get good policy in place now. Yesterday would have been better, now it's second best, in order to achieve the full emissions reduction target in time. The second thing I'm looking for is generating other health and environmental benefits for North Carolina communities, with particular care for environmental justice communities. Reducing coal combustion will also reduce co-pollutants and localized health impacts. But I absolutely agree with you, Commissioner Carter, that we need an EJ analysis and that consideration throughout this rulemaking process. The North Carolina A1 modeling also showed SOx and NOx reductions from RGGI. And then the last thing is making sure that electricity is affordable, particularly for low-income consumers. And that's where I think this proposal is particularly interesting. The consignment auction allows for revenue generation, and while the Utilities Commission would decide how the regulated utilities get to allocate those funds, their mandate is to make sure that the auction would benefit ratepayers. So the A1 report modeled RGGI without returning revenue to electricity consumers, in which case residential rates rose by less than 1%. And then another one with revenue being recycled back to residential consumers, similar to the consignment auction, which actually saved residential consumers money. So I'd encourage folks to look at, there's a lot in that report that can inform this conversation, and I would just like to applaud the really robust stakeholder process that occurred over the last 4 years that got us to this point. The last point that I would make quickly that I think weighs in favor of this particular petition is that it's a proven program. And one of our utilities in North Carolina, Dominion, already participates in RGGI. So I think we're well positioned to move forward with this option. I'm looking forward to discussing it more with DEQ and others. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you. As said by others, this really is the first step. This is a rulemaking process, and there's lots of room to address the improvements that have been mentioned by Commissioner Solomon and Carter. Of a comparable generation to Commissioner Carter and Chair Myberg, I will say, looking back on Title IV, while there may not be ready-to-go-to-market CO2 reduction technologies directly available comparable to the SO2 reductions at the time, the new way of looking at it is that there are alternative technologies or renewable technologies that are available that are being scaled up. So that, in modern day sense, is the approach to dealing with this, as well as the additional reductions that are being achieved through efficiencies that are being installed. Last of all, I would say I've had on my goals list from day one of being on this commission of improving children's health. And to me, this goes a huge step forward as we develop this rule, because ultimately we are looking to the future generations for benefiting them, giving them a healthy, enjoyable life. Thank you.
I've been intrigued by it. I have to tell a story, another story, and that is relates to sulfur emissions. And Commissioner Carter is exactly right about how dramatic the 1990 amendments were, but it's interesting to see what happened after that. That in 1980 or 1990, I believe, there were about 23 million tons of sulfur emissions coming from electric utilities, and the objective of the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 was to cut that by 2000 to 12 million tons. So it's about 10 or something like that. Yeah, cut in half basically. If you look at sulfur emissions from electric utilities today, the number is about 2.6 million tons. So there has been far more reduction than people expected. There's all kind of reasons why that's the case, but it's interesting that, and that gives me hope actually for this. But I also think it's true, and one of the things I particularly liked about the RGGI approach is it takes advantage of the value of market systems. It does give you incentives to do the right things in terms of finding least cost reductions, because there is a lot to be said for achieving reductions at least cost, and to the extent you can use market mechanisms to do that, there's a lot to be said for it. I am concerned, as Commissioner Solomon is, about the cost of DEQ, because it does take resources to implement this sort of thing, and that's going to have to be addressed as we think about moving forward. But the objective remains, for me at least, to achieve reductions as fast and as practically as possible. And moving to approve this petition to go to rulemaking, I think, moves that ball forward. So with that, let me go ahead and call the roll. Commissioner Arata?
Yes.
Commissioner, I'm not seeing Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Bailey,
Yes.
Commissioner Carter,
No.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Deerhake,
Yes.
Commissioner Harris, Commissioner, that was yes. Commissioner Keene,
No.
Commissioner McAdams,
Yes.
Commissioner Monist,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon.
No.
And the chair in this case votes yes. So, Commissioner Ozorek, I'm sorry, I missed you. It's
Better
Commissioner.
vote yes now.
True, yeah. Well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Anderson. I vote yes.
Oh, Commissioner Anderson, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry to have overlooked you. My apologies. Thank you. I think Commissioner Ozorek may not be on the screen right this minute. Am I correct? So record Commissioner Ozorek is not voting.
Yeah, she skipped.
Pardon?
She skipped her vote. She may have disagreed with you.
No,
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Keep that out of the minutes, by the way.
Do you have? So let's count. Did you have? We have 8 in favor. Does that include me? Okay, now we have 9 in favor and 3 opposed, so the motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you again for the continued quality of this discussion. For those who did vote no, I understand the reasoning behind that, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that the rulemaking on this is going to be simple. I think it is going to be quite involved, and all the stakeholders who have been involved to this point, I hope will be prepared to stay involved because we have a long way to go. So thank you. The next item on the agenda, which I have somewhere as well. Here we go. The next item on the agenda is something that came up relatively late, and as some of you know, I was on travel last week, and you'll all recall that back in March we adopted a special order of consent with respect to releases of 1,4-dioxane and from the city of Greensboro's T.Z. Osborne wastewater treatment plant. On July 1st, there was a press release from the North Carolina DEQ that said that Greensboro reported elevated levels of 1,4-dioxane discharge and potential impact of groundwater systems. And the preliminary results of this sample showed levels from 543 micrograms per liter to 687 micrograms per liter in the T.Z. Osborne plant effluent. Well, the special order and consent had been talking about levels moving to 40 and 35 micrograms per liter, and when you see numbers that are an order of magnitude higher, at least for me, this was a cause of concern. And so I wanted to put this on the agenda for us to talk some about that and to consider whether there should be some additional work with respect to what's going on here. Now, I also know that this is bound up to some extent in ongoing discussions about the SOC, and there may be a motion that we need to make at this time about that to go into closed session.
I'll make that motion to go to closed session.
I think Commissioner Deerhake has a very precise motion that if you're willing to yield to Commissioner Deerhake in the second bit.
As precise as it needs to be. I thought that was precise, pretty precise right there. Go to closed session. Go ahead, Commissioner Deerhake.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon and Chair Myberg. Pursuant to NC General Statute Section 143-318.11A3, I move the Commission enter into closed session to consult with Council regarding the ongoing contested cases filed by the Haw River Assembly and the Fayetteville Public Works Commission challenging the special order by consent, which is OAH case numbers 21 EHR 1770 and 1771.
I take it Commissioner Solomon might second that?
I'll skip the reading of whatever that statute was because I haven't read it, but I will second it, yes.
Okay, so a motion and a second. Let me do a quick roll call. Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Arata?
Yes.
Commissioner Bailey?
Yes.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes.
Commissioner Davis?
Yes.
Commissioner Deerhake?
Yes.
Commissioner Harris,
Yes.
Commissioner King,
Yes.
Commissioner McAdams,
Yes.
Commissioner Monis,
Yes.
Commissioner Solomon.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think we've done a closed session in a long time, but I'm afraid I may have to invite some of our audience participants to leave. Members of the department who are involved in this can certainly stay.
And we'll also
And a reminder, we'll have to go back into open session, so we'll call
Yes.
people back in, and we may do business or have discussions after
That
closed session, so.
Thank you, Commissioner Solomon. That's exactly right.
ask staff to